She sat down in the chair across from me and said something I have heard more times than I can count. I eat salad every day. I drink my water. I take the fiber supplement. I even started with the prune juice. She paused. Nothing works the way it used to. She was 67, no major illness, active, careful, aware of her health in the way that people who have lived long enough to understand its value tend to be. And yet her colon was slow, sluggish, not broken. She was very clear about that. Just reluctant. I asked her what she had stopped eating over the years, what foods had quietly disappeared from her table. She thought about it. Then she said, "I guess I stopped cooking the way my mother used to cook." That answer opened a longer conversation than either of us expected. I'm Dr. Nora Khalil, and I've been practicing medicine for 12 years, most of that time working with adults over 60. What I've come to understand, slowly, over many consultations, is that what the body is missing is often not something new. It's something old that quietly disappeared. If you're watching this channel for the first time, I want to invite you to subscribe. What we do here is not quick fixes. It's not trending protocols. It's slow, careful medicine, the kind that tries to understand what is actually happening in your body before telling you what to do about it. I think you'll find it worth your time. Before we get to the specific food I want to talk about today, I need to say something about constipation after 60 that most videos skip entirely. Your colon is not broken. I want to say that again because I think it matters. When people come to me frustrated, tired of laxatives, tired of waiting, tired of a body that used to work more reliably, there's often a quiet, unspoken fear underneath all of that. The fear that this is just aging, that this is the new normal, that the colon has simply given up. That is almost never what is happening. What I see much more commonly is a colon that is underfed, underhydrated, and understimulated. A colon that has the right architecture, the right muscles, the right nerve signals, but is not receiving the raw material it needs to do its job well. Here's how I think about it. Your colon is not a passive pipe. It is an active structure. It contracts, it pushes, it coordinates rhythm across nearly 5 feet of tissue. That takes 3 things working together: volume inside the colon, stool that has enough bulk and moisture to give the muscle wall something to grip, an internal environment that supports bacterial activity because the bacteria in your gut are not passengers, they are workers, and a body that is strong enough, mobile enough, and nourished enough to support the whole routine that keeps bowel function regular. When any one of those 3 things is missing, the whole system slows down. Not because something went wrong, because something is not there. And here's where the woman I told you about at the beginning of this video leads us somewhere useful. She was eating fiber, she was drinking water, she was doing the things she had been told to do, but she had, without fully realizing it, stripped her meals down. Less protein, less variety, less of the old-fashioned foods that her mother's kitchen used to produce without thinking about it. The missing piece, for her, was not complicated. It was lentils. I want to spend a moment on why lentils specifically, not because lentils are a miracle. I don't believe in miracles of nutrition. I believe in mechanisms. And lentils have several mechanisms that are quietly very useful for the colon after 60. But first, why forgotten? Lentils are old food, not trendy food, not expensive food, not the kind of food that gets articles written about it or ends up on the label of a premium supplement. They are the food that previous generations ate without discussing it, without measuring the fiber content, without knowing the word prebiotic. They ate it because it was cheap, filling, and satisfying in a way that held through the afternoon. Over time, for many people in this country, that kind of cooking quietly disappeared. Meals got simpler, portions of protein shifted toward meat or protein powders. Legumes were sometimes avoided because of concerns about gas or bloating, a concern I'll come back to because it deserves a proper answer. And so for many adults over 60 who are dealing with a slow colon, lentils aren't missing because anyone decided to remove them. They're missing because they were never replaced when the cooking patterns changed. What that means, practically, is that a lot of the colon support that used to come from meals The fiber, the plant protein, the specific compounds that feed gut bacteria simply stopped arriving. There is something I find worth pausing on here. The people who tend to do best after 60, in my experience, are not the ones who have discovered the most sophisticated supplements or the most optimized protocols. They are the ones who have maintained or returned to a certain nutritional density in their meals that contain multiple things at once, not a fiber pill and a glass of water, a bowl of food that has fiber and protein and slow carbohydrate all in the same bite. Lentils are, almost by design, that kind of food. They are one of very few plant foods that deliver meaningful amounts of protein and fiber simultaneously, along with complex carbohydrates that digest slowly enough to sustain energy without spiking blood sugar the way simple carbohydrates do. For a colon that needs multiple inputs, bulk, bacterial fuel, sustained physical activity, a food that provides 3 of those inputs in one serving is not a small thing. Let me tell you what those compounds actually do, one at a time. Dietary fiber comes in 2 forms, and both matter for what we're talking about, but they matter differently. Soluble fiber, the kind that dissolves in water, forms a gel-like consistency as it moves through the digestive tract. This slows digestion slightly, which sounds counterproductive when you're talking about constipation. But what it actually does is hold moisture in the stool as it travels through the colon. Moist formed stool is easier for the colon wall to grip and move. A dry, compacted small stool requires much more force to propel, and after 60, when colonic motility tends to slow naturally, that extra required force matters. Insoluble fiber, the kind that doesn't dissolve, adds physical bulk. It gives the colon wall something substantial to work against. Lentils contain both. A single cooked cup has close to 16 grams of dietary fiber, split between both types. That is significant, especially for someone who is already doing the basics, drinking water, eating some vegetables, but still not getting enough of this particular combination. There is also something worth understanding about how fiber requirements shift after 60. Most guidelines suggest adults need somewhere between 22 and 34 grams of fiber per day. The reality, from what I see in practice, is that many older adults are consistently falling below that range. Not because they are careless, but because appetite decreases, portion sizes shrink, and the foods that used to anchor a meal naturally have been replaced with simpler alternatives. A cup of cooked lentils alone gets you nearly halfway to that daily goal. That is a meaningful contribution from a single ingredient. But here's what I want you to notice. Fiber alone is not the story. Fiber is the foundation. What's built on top of it is what makes lentils different from a fiber supplement taken with a glass of water. Your gut contains somewhere in the range of 38 trillion bacteria. That number still stops me for a moment every time I say it out loud. 38 trillion organisms living in a community, competing, cooperating, producing compounds that your own cells use for energy, for signaling, for immune regulation. The colon specifically is where most of that community lives, and those bacteria need to eat. What they eat is called prebiotic fiber, specific carbohydrate structures that the human body cannot digest on its own, but that gut bacteria can ferment. The fermentation produces short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, which is one of the primary energy sources for the cells lining your colon wall. A well-fed colon lining is a more functional colon lining. The cells contract more reliably. The mucus layer is healthier. The whole system moves more smoothly. Lentils contain oligosaccharides, a class of prebiotic carbohydrate that gut bacteria are particularly effective at fermenting. This is also, I should be honest, why some people experience gas when they eat lentils. The fermentation process produces gas as a byproduct. I'll tell you in a moment how to reduce that. But the gas is evidence of something useful happening. It means your bacteria are active and well supplied. When the bacteria are not well supplied, when the diet has been stripped down to easily digestible foods with little fiber and little prebiotic content, the community changes. Less fermentation happens, less butyrate is produced. The colon lining becomes, over time, less well supported. And the whole rhythm of colonic movement, which depends partly on those bacterial signals, becomes less reliable. I want to stay with this point a moment longer because I think it gets dismissed too quickly. Most people understand that gut bacteria exist. What fewer people appreciate is that this bacterial community is not static. It changes in response to what you feed it over weeks and months. A diet that consistently provides prebiotic fiber tends to cultivate a more diverse, more functional bacterial community. A diet that eliminates it, even for good reasons like reducing carbohydrates or simplifying meals, tends to reduce that diversity over time. After 60, this matters more than it did at 40. The bacterial community naturally becomes somewhat less diverse with age. The colon wall naturally becomes somewhat less responsive. The margins get narrower, which means that the inputs that support gut bacterial health, foods like lentils, carry more weight than they did when the system had more resilience built in. I've seen this pattern in patients who describe eating cleanly, avoiding processed food, keeping meals simple, but who have accidentally also eliminated most of the complexity that gut bacteria require. The gut is not simple. It was not designed for simple meals. It was designed for variety, and particularly for plant variety, and lentils are one of the most efficient ways to deliver that variety in a single food. This is the part that most people miss. We think of constipation as a gut problem, and it is, but the gut does not function independently of the rest of the body, and after 60, one of the most consequential things happening in the body, slowly, quietly, without any dramatic announcement, is the gradual loss of muscle mass. Sarcopenia, the medical term for age-related muscle loss, begins as early as the late 30s or 40s, but accelerates after 60. By the time someone is in their 70s, they may have lost 20, 25, even 30% of the muscle mass they had in younger decades, and this affects more than the ability to climb stairs or carry groceries. Physical activity, even the moderate daily kind, like walking after meals or moving through the house, is one of the most consistent regulators of bowel motility. Movement stimulates peristalsis, the wave-like muscular contractions that move stool through the colon. When someone becomes less active, often because the body feels weaker, heavier, less willing, bowel function tends to suffer. Protein is one of the primary tools we have for preserving muscle mass after 60, not building it dramatically, the way a young person might in a gym, but preserving it, maintaining the base that supports strength, mobility, and daily function. Lentils are one of the best plant-based sources of protein available. A cooked cup contains roughly 18 grams. For a person who is cutting back on meat, or simply not eating as much protein as they used to, that number is not trivial. I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying lentils push stool directly the way a laxative does. That would be a dishonest claim. What I'm saying is that protein supports the body that supports movement, and movement supports the colon. The chain is real, even if it is longer than a direct mechanism. My father used to say that a house built on a narrow foundation will eventually lean. He was talking about architecture. But I've thought about it often in relation to this. The colon does not function in isolation. It functions on a foundation, and adequate protein is part of that foundation. I want to add something here that doesn't come up in most discussions about constipation, but that I think matters. The colon operates on a rhythm. It is not randomly active throughout the day. There are specific periods, typically in the morning, after waking, after eating, when colonic motility increases significantly. Gastroenterologists call this the gastrocolic reflex, the signal triggered by eating that wakes up the lower digestive tract and initiates movement. After 60, that reflex tends to be less robust. It takes more input to trigger it, and one of the inputs that helps sustain it across the day is a steady supply of nutrients, not just water, not just isolated fiber, but a real meal with protein and slow carbohydrate that keeps blood sugar stable and sustains the metabolic activity that the colon depends on. This is another reason why the simple advice, eat more fiber, drink more water, can fall short. If the meal is small, the gastrocolic reflex is weak. If the meal has water and a fiber supplement but little else, the reflex fires quietly and the colon moves slowly. A more substantial meal, one that includes protein and slow-digesting carbohydrate alongside the fiber, tends to produce a more consistent response. This is not a reason to eat more than your body needs or wants. It is a reason to think about what you are eating, not only how much. And it is another reason why lentils in a warm soup or a mixed dish that constitutes a real meal rather than a supplement alongside a small snack tend to be more effective than adding fiber powder to a glass of water. Here is where I gently disagree with the standard advice, and I want to be clear that this is a clinical observation, not a criticism. When people come to me with constipation, the typical recommendations they've received are drink more water, add fiber, move more. Those are not wrong, but they are incomplete in a way that leaves many people frustrated, particularly people who are already doing those things and still struggling. The incomplete piece is protein. After 60, many people have reduced their total food intake, either because appetite decreases, or because they're watching calories, or because cooking for 1 or 2 people tends towards simpler, smaller meals. When food intake decreases, protein is often the first thing that quietly disappears, particularly plant protein, which requires more preparation than opening a can or heating a chicken breast. The result, in many cases, is a diet that has reasonable hydration, reasonable vegetable intake, even adequate fiber supplements, but not enough whole food protein to support the muscle mass and physical energy that keeps daily activity going. And daily activity, as I said, is one of the most reliable regulators of bowel motility. This is why fiber supplements alone often provide partial relief, but not full, consistent relief. The supplement is addressing one piece, but the other pieces, the prebiotic activity, the protein, the sustained energy that comes from slow digesting carbohydrates, are still absent. Lentils address all 3 at once. That is not a small thing. I want to spend some time here on something practical, because the medical guidance around lentils tends to come either too late or too vaguely. The most common concern I hear is gas, and the concern is legitimate, especially for people who have sensitive digestion, who have not eaten legumes regularly in years, or who are managing other gut conditions. The key is introduction, not elimination. If you haven't eaten lentils in a while, your gut bacteria are not currently optimized to ferment them efficiently. That changes over time with repeated exposure. The bacterial community adapts. But if you start with a large portion, the bacteria produce more gas than the system can comfortably handle. Start small. A 1/4 cup of cooked lentils in a meal a few times a week. Cook them thoroughly. Well-cooked lentils are significantly easier to digest than lentils that still have texture in the center. Drain and rinse canned lentils if you're using them. Drink water across the day, not just with meals. Over 2 to 4 weeks, you can gradually increase the portion as your gut adjusts. Red lentils specifically tend to be easier to digest than green or brown because they are smaller and break down more completely during cooking. If you're starting fresh, red lentils in a soup are a gentle entry point. The heat and the liquid soften them completely, and the result is a texture that the gut processes with far less difficulty than a firm legume would require. Something else that helps: eating lentils as part of a full meal rather than on their own. The presence of other foods, a little fat from olive oil, some vegetables, a small portion of grain, slows the overall pace of digestion slightly, which gives the gut more time to process the fermentable carbohydrates without producing an excessive gas all at once. Now, the necessary clarification, and I mean this seriously: there are situations where increasing lentils requires a conversation with your doctor before you proceed. If you have kidney disease or follow a low potassium diet, lentils are high in potassium and need to be managed carefully. If you are in an active flare of diverticulitis, the fiber content may be irritating rather than helpful. If you follow a low FODMAP diet for irritable bowel syndrome, lentils fall into a category that some people tolerate and some do not, and that requires individual guidance. If you have a history of severe gas or bloating with legumes, there may be something else driving that pattern worth investigating. A food can be genuinely healthy and still not be the right food at the right time for every person. That is not a contradiction. It is medicine. For most adults over 60 who are otherwise in reasonable health and simply dealing with a slow, stubborn colon, Adding lentils slowly and consistently is one of the most grounded, evidence-supported, inexpensive, and underutilized things they can do. The woman I told you about at the beginning of this video came back 3 months later. She had started making lentil soup once a week, then twice. Then she started adding lentils to other things, a rice dish, a salad, a simple stew. She wasn't following a protocol. She was just cooking the way her mother used to cook and paying attention to how her body responded. She told me that her bowel function had become more consistent, not perfect, not dramatic, but regular, in a way that felt different from when she was relying entirely on supplements and fiber crackers. What I took from her story, and from the many similar stories I have seen, is that the colon often responds not to something new, but to something restored. The body has been doing this work for decades. It remembers how to do it. It just needs the right material to work with. That is not a poetic metaphor. It is fairly close to the biology. If this video helped you think about your colon differently, not as a broken system, but as a well-designed one that may simply be underfed, I would be glad if you shared it with someone you think might need to hear it. And if you watched our last video, the one about the breakfast mistakes that quietly work against fat loss after 60, you may have noticed something. Many of the same patterns show up: foods that seem safe, habits that seem careful, and a body that is quietly not getting what it needs to function at its best. Those two videos are related. The morning routine affects more than energy and metabolism. It affects what the colon receives for the entire day. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd suggest watching it after this one. The connection is worth understanding. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.